Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of TBR. I'm George Binns. This evening, we want to talk with the once and future councilor of Ward 1, Todd Rotondo, about what's going on in the Ward 1 and the city in general. So how's Ward 1 reacting to the bridge out?
Thanks for having me on the show. Listen, we've had this bridge out for now over a year. It went out in June of 2022. How are people reacting? They're frustrated, as you know, as we all are. It's the traffic that's being created in response to the bridge being out. So what we're having is an increase. So I live on Kernwood Ave, and I've seen a decrease in traffic. I'm almost like a side street now. Like once upon a time when the Kernwood Bridge was open, traffic would be backed up to my house. I don't see that anymore. Yeah. So it's become a much quieter street, same as Bridge Street. But conversely, the homes between Bridge and Elliott Street are seeing the additional flow of traffic with up to 2,000 cars per day on some of these streets. These streets weren't built to accommodate those types of cars, and houses were bought with the intentions of living on a quieter street.
Yeah, with kids playing in the street. Yeah.
And that's where the concerns are, the safety of the kids.
Yeah.
So what we have done, you know, the bridge is closed. It's a state asset. We as a city are, you know, advocating and talking with the state as well as the federal government, the various stakeholders, the various agencies that are involved to try to make it as seamless as possible. The disappointing part for me, and I'm sure many other people, is when they said that it was going to be a 3.5, 4 year time span for the temporary. At least I thought it was going to start June 2022 when the bridge closed. It wasn't. What started was when the design phases were presented to MassDOT at 25%, and that's when the clock started. And if you've watched any of the meetings, or whomever has, you know that there's restrictions within the waterways as well with what they can and can't do. They're, you know, time restricted because of, you know, the various marine lives that we have to be mindful of. Yeah. And so that also makes it a slower process, because I hear all the time, what's taking the state so long to build a small span bridge? We can do it over I-95 in Pennsylvania. We can do it down in Florida. Uniquely is we have a span that opens up, even though it's manually, that has jurisdictions with the Coast Guard. So the Coast Guard has the last say of it. We have the Bass Haven Yacht Club that has vessels that go underneath it, or they get, you know, transported through there to their moorings. And they have roughly about 19 times it opens. So it's still navigational waters, even though there's not a lot of excessive use to it. So unfortunately, with all of that in play, it's making it harder to get this project done quicker. So we as a city are pushing everything we can, making sure that the meetings are being met, that all of these time frames are hitting their right marks. A lot of meetings are going on. You know, that's in response to the bridge. But how do we mitigate the issues that are happening in the neighborhoods now? Yeah. So the first thing were like Kernwood Heights. We asked the mayor to put a double yellow line with the DPS, and they did put it in. It sounds like a small little thing, but reality is going up and down the hill, there's blind spots. We as drivers tend to go to the middle, and you know, the fear was, you know, with this additional traffic, there may be accidents. This sort of just kind of keeps the delineation for going up and down the hill. And then what happens is you have all this additional traffic going up Kernwood Heights, and you have a school right there, and there's a lot of congestion happening on first thing in the morning with people crossing. They had 2 crossing guards up there, and they were doing the best that they could, but it still was congested. So then we proposed and was granted the 7:45 to 8:30 do not interrupt Kernwood Heights. So that helped to alleviate the traffic. It doesn't eradicate it, but it alleviates it greatly. People are still going to find their ways to get up there. As well as the neighbors petitioned to get a crosswalk put in at the Woodland and Livingstone area, which would allow for another additional area to cross the traffic, because there was no other really crosswalk in that area, as well as the access to the park, make it a little safer.
Yeah, it was a residential area. You don't need all this traffic control, theoretically, because there's not supposed to be traffic.
And so
that's the big problem, I guess, is shifting the traffic into an area that's not prepared for it.
Right, and there's no good solution, really. The good solution is having the bridge open. And we don't have that as an option. So really it's my job as a councilor to really listen to the neighbors. Everything that they throw at me, everything. We've had meetings at Livingstone Park. We've had small group meetings in certain sections of the neighborhood. I was just down with some neighbors down at County Way and Northern Ave, because now they're dealing with the issue with the paving at the top third of Elliott from County Way up to Danvers Beverly line. And so the truck route is going to be diverted down to Northern Ave, which now,
Yeah, and that's another thing that doesn't go through a neighborhood very gracefully. There's a big truck
an
full of,
18-wheeler.
yeah, with a load of blacktop.
Right.
Yeah.
And so interestingly enough, when is the best time to do the paving? There is no best time.
No.
Best time would be magically, it's poof, it's there. Yeah. But what can we do to mitigate it, to make it easier?
Yeah, the best time was 10 years ago. Yeah.
Right, and that's another discussion in regards to the maintenance of the infrastructure and funding and what have you. Similarly with our bridges and our bridges throughout the state. We know that people said, well, we knew the bridge was in tough shape. We did. And I can tell you, Commissioner Collins, even prior to the current administration, under the Scanlon administration, would make it known he had found plans, which is one of the reasons why we said, let's look at the offset. He had found plans from the 1930s that were there. Everyone was aware of it, but because it's a state asset, and finally someone in the state had admitted that the last meeting, the public community meeting, it was the funding. They didn't recognize funding to do the infrastructure.
Yeah.
Kernwood Bridge was identified under a different pot of money, which was programmed, it still is programmed to be 2027. So that bridge was going to be done first.
Yeah.
Then the infrastructure bill passed by federal government back in February 2022, the $1 trillion, state gets its share of the money, and the Governor Baker at the time identified 62 or 64 additional bridges within the state. One of them was the Hall-Whitaker. So now they have at least identified some funding. Now that funding would go towards the design work, the permitting and what have you, and then actually the physical build. Well, they do a thorough inspection, not that they don't do it, but they obviously were doing their inspection, and they deemed it to not even be safe to have any cars. The grids were off, underneath was just too far for them to really repair it.
Yeah.
So now they identified the funding, but now we have the Kernwood Bridge that they were originally going to do first, and then the Hall-Whitaker, and that's when people were up in arms. You closed the bridge, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
So now it's the city had their meetings, the state heard, and the state came back and said, we're going to put an offset of a bridge to the right, heading down Bridge Street towards the Monahan side. That will allow for temporary traffic for however many years, but it's going to take 3.5, 4 years to build. There will be no interruption of pedestrian or bicycle traffic over the bridge. And then at the time when that's constructed and now there's traffic going over it, then the plan now is to demolish both bridges at the same time and build them at the same time. That wasn't the original plan. The original plan is we're closed now, build a temporary bridge over the existing footprint of the broken bridge because it was the easiest to get permitting because you already have it there.
Yeah.
Get the traffic flowing, and then at the back end, once the Kernwood was completed, it would be to shut it down again to put the permanent bridge in. So now you're going to disrupt 2 generations, basically, of traffic.
Well, this thing is getting to be out of hand because there's more and more permitting requirements and more people getting involved. And again, I'm very simple-minded. Put in a Bailey Bridge and figure it out later. And you keep getting told, well, it's not critical enough to do that because I remember when I was growing up, there was a big hurricane blew through this area all the time. It was a yearly event. But it took out a bridge on I-95 in Connecticut. They put in a Bailey Bridge, and they kept it going for a couple of years until they got around to putting in a permanent one. And every time I mention that to somebody, oh, it's not critical enough, we can't do that. And I guess the frustration that I would have if I was one of the natives on the Ryle Side area is, yeah, I hear all this good talk, but it's all ends up with, well, we can't do this, we can't do that. And I guess the frustration comes down to where the hell is the can-do attitude to make something happen? And a year to come up with a temporary plan has got to be very frustrating.
It is, and exactly what you said is, ultimately, a Bailey Bridge is what's going to go there. We know that. That's going to be the temporary bridge. The frustrating part is to get to that Bailey Bridge. And you're right, there's so many regulatory agencies involved now. You have the EPA, the DEP, you have Fishery and Marine, you have the Coast Guard. So you have all these various agencies that do requirement regulatory stand times. And it's, I will say sitting in meetings with the mayor and as well as other stakeholders within the state DEP, or the Mass DOT, as well as Congressman Moulton's office, the Senator Lovely Paracella, and even the federal level of Warren and Markey, their office were involved. It's how do we advocate to push these agencies to allow us to get it done quicker, extend, where there's going to be a, span of X amount of times that you can't do any borings. They're doing the borings right now because those restrictions have finally expired because it's July, so the middle of July, and then they have until a certain other time. And so, fortunately,
Testing fire alarms.
so fortunately, they have this, agencies that they have to go
Yeah.
through, and it's
and
frustrating. I don't have you're like me. I'm where you're at. Is like it's
Yeah.
frustrating. Why are we just not doing it? And I know it's kind of like ask for forgiveness afterwards. We have ultimately 10,000 cars going over that bridge, and we have very limited.
And they're worrying
traffic.
about some fish going to spawn.
Yeah, well, I may be in the same
I
page with you.
understand that there are certain groups that have a different focus than I do. But I think the part of the problem that everybody's saying, hey, 10,000 cars going across that bridge, that's significant.
Right.
And that takes precedent over a couple of fish going out to spawn or a couple of boats that have to go back and forth so they have a fun ride on the weekend.
And George, you're not hearing a disagreement out
I
of
know.
me on that.
I'm preaching to the choir.
Yeah,
I know it.
even we're seeing the Elliott Street traffic, right? Right now it's been a little better because school traffic's not in. Listen, that's going to be creeping right back up soon enough.
Yes. As soon as the middle school opens up, where they dump them all? End up on Elliott Street. Yeah.
Well, even Ayers traffic, which comes down Green,
Yeah.
Woodland and Green, and that's where they ultimately. So we're gonna, regardless, we're stuck with what we have right
Yeah.
now, and it's really is when residents call me, it's my job to listen to them and see if I'm going to push whatever they ask. Now,
Yeah.
whether I get pushback is a different story. But the mayor has been at least very open-minded and receptive to the different things that we're doing. And it's, listen, the state, Senator Lovely and Representative Paracella gave us $100,000 to help mitigate different efforts, and they used it to add an additional traffic person, which helps with the people complaining about the speeding or breaking stop signs because it's the safety part, or buying additional of equipment and things of that nature.
Unfortunately, this is the reality of municipal government, that you've got so many other agencies that got a finger in your pie that you can't get them out of it. And I think I've been frustrated about this problem because I'm just on the outside looking in. But when Seth Moulton and the mayor had that photo op, they're standing there with the umbrella, and they said, "Why do you need a permit? You already got a bridge." I think, hey, something's going to happen, and it didn't. And
It was a good photo op.
Good photo op.
I agree, and of course, Congressman, God bless him, he was there. I'm hoping his office is doing everything in their power to really hope that the agencies that even fall under him are able to encourage them to speed up things or maybe shorten certain regulatory timelines.
Yeah, it's just a matter of somebody saying, we'll get to those other regulations later. We already solved that problem once. It can't be that bad no matter what we do. Put the bridge in tomorrow. And I can imagine one of our favorite sons from up the road a piece, a guy named Little Georgie Patton. I can imagine him sitting there and saying, it's going to take how long to get that Bailey Bridge installed?
Right.
But anyway, aside from that, the other issue that was on the back burner for a while, got lit up a few years back, and now it seems to be on the back burner, is the Bass River overlay. And to some extent, I can understand that that gets sort of put on the back burner because it all depends on the Hale Whitaker Bridge, among other things. And what are you going to do about Monahans? They're going to move or not? But at the same time, here's a quiet period, and I would be thinking that, hey, something ought to be going on to keep that ball rolling so we don't have to start all over again in 13 years. What was that all about?
Right. So the Bass Haven Overlay District, which I sat on with Councilor Rand on that committee and amongst other members of the community, hired Utility or Utile, however you pronounce the company, and it was also with the design standards. So that was being looked at, it was being investigated to look at the parcels of land, how much they could be developed. In an engineer theory, they can develop everything to the perfect And the numbers came out, 800 to 1,400 or 1,200, whatever numbers. And I've personally talked to developers who've developed within the city, and then those numbers weren't the numbers I was hearing from them 550, 650, which is still a lot of concentration in that area. And that's still on the back burner. So the study's been done. We know what it could possibly look like.
Yeah.
We know the Bolamat been sold. Gable's property out of, I believe it's Georgia, bought it. They're still sitting on it. By right, they could go a 35-foot high, say, a self-storage unit placed there. The car wash is still sitting there no matter what. Monahan's, all those other parcels of land, listen, they have to be interested to sell. So the value of the property has to be there. The zoning's not there. When we had those community meetings at the school, the mayor said that when the bridge closed, or when it was shut down suddenly, he said that without a traffic study, he wouldn't pursue changing the zoning. So it has since been put on the shelf because we haven't done an efficient traffic study. Now, I've talked to people who says, well, we could still manipulate the numbers we have to make it, that it would satisfy what a traffic study would require. But if I went to the people of Ryleside, and I'm sure the people of Goat Hill will feel the same way, is if I went to them and said, hey, listen, they can take those numbers and manipulate them so that they would fit into, by using the current data and showing what it could be, we can get a sort of accurate. They're not going to believe that because they want to physically see it being done. And I agree with them, is that bridge has to be open. Yeah. So, the perception is, yeah, you can do that in theory. I mean, I'm sure you can make an elephant stand on the head of a nail in theory, but it can't happen. Yeah. So with regards to the Bass River Overlay District, that's been studied. We do have it. It's now sort of, receive and put on hold right now. We're going to keep it on the shelf to if in 4 years or 2 years, whatever the case may be when that bridge opens, and then it's the request of having a traffic study being observed. Because the residents of Ryleside, with their biggest concern is the traffic increase, and we're living it right now. Yeah. We're living it in real time. Yeah. And I know we're talking about walkable districts and things of that nature, and it's close to the train station, and it makes sense, but it's changing people's habits, and at some point we will get there. But again, even if this district is created, let's say hypothetically 5 years, 6 years, it doesn't mean that it happens overnight. Because, the district on Rantoul Street was created back in 07, 08. Yeah. And we had the Great Recession. And nothing got really bought. And then, Beverly Crossing came out. It was the other company, its predecessor, had started doing that one building. But nothing really happened quick. And then all of a sudden the economy was getting better, interest rates came down. And then we saw the blast of all the apartments going up. So it was like, all right, well, the zoning was passed in 07, 08. Under the Scanlon administration and the, prior council that was on it at that time, there was no money to really do anything because it was, we were in a Great Recession. And then the money started becoming cheap in 2012, 13, and then we started seeing all of that zoning change go in. That could similarly happen here, but the mayor has promised the Ryleside people, and I'm going to, obviously the Goat Hill people, that he has no intentions of pursuing right now any changes. Listen, he presents it to the council. It's still the 9 members on the council to accept the overlay district. So that's where that's at right now. So there really hasn't been any talk of it. You'll hear rumors every so often resurfacing up that car wash is being, forced to, go out. I talk to Todd Rotondo. Every time I hear a rumor, I go down and talk to him. Do you feel that way? Nope. Okay, it's just an old rumor being resurfaced. And the state closed the bridge so that they could, encourage the development. It's none of that's going on. There's no collusion going on. Yeah. And if there is, I'm definitely out of that conversation. Yeah. But again, so that whole Bass River Overlay District is really on pause, at least until that bridge is, temporary bridge is put in. Yeah.
Well, the other big project that just got passed by the City Council is the rehabilitation of City Hall. And that's a big chunk of money. Had a discussion with Jim Medugno on camera a while back, and the numbers ran out to looks like close to $35 million when you add up all the bits and pieces. And as we were discussing before the show, maybe all those bits and pieces are not separate entities. Some of them may be contained in some of the numbers. So what's your take on what's the real impact of that?
So City Hall is on the capital plan to be renovated.
Yeah.
And we know that there's additional space that needs. We know municipal offices, inspection office in the JR Hall. which should be rightfully to the veterans, right? That was what the hall was created. We know that the Board of Health is sharing space with the Council on Aging. Council on Aging knows they don't have enough adequate space to do all the programming that they would like to do, but they're there. And so they're all spread out throughout the area. We also had the police station that has since moved. They've now moved to their new 32,000 square foot campus on Elliott Street. So we have this space there, and we always there's a policy in place through the city where they want to have X amount of free cash, X amount of a percentage of stabilization fund, as well as debt service, right? And they never want to go above 8%. So that is any given time when a project comes off the debt roll. So say one of the schools that we had bonded for, it comes off, it opens up for debt and allows us to actually do a project. Now, we did the City Hall, the exterior was done, they repointed and all that. Where you feel and agree on whether City Hall, I personally feel that it needs to get done. I think we need the space. We need to consolidate all the offices in there. We have the campus in the back. We've seen presented to us several different scenarios of what it could look like, and it varied in total square feet space from 40 to 44,000 square feet of total space between the police station and the City Hall. Mm-hmm. So that being said, so what the mayor came to us with his administration and budget the finance director said is we're looking at about 25 million. The OPM is coming up with about this figure to create it. Now, it could go a little higher. Hopefully it doesn't. We don't know, right? Inflation is inflation. We've seen cost of goods jump in a matter of months. But right now, what the mayor has presented to the council is they're looking at a $25 million placeholder. And we haven't approved the funding for that $25 million yet. We're just, now they're doing their design
works. What have you approved?
We approved the $8 million to purchase the parking lot with the commercial building, the Family Dollar Store.
Yep.
And that really was the initial intent of purchasing that piece of property, was to preserve the parking for the downtown area.
Yep.
That was our first goal. Now, knowing that we were now looking at the City Hall renovations and all of those office spaces would need to be relocated, they looked at, the Cummings centers where they looked at because they have the largest chunk.
Yeah.
They saw what the comparables were, and it's about $500,000 a year to, move to the Cummings Center.
Yeah.
And so Jim's numbers were right on that regards.
Yep.
So then it was, can we look at the Family Dollar, Bonefish Harry, and Rent-A-Center to relocate the bottom floor to put this office space there? So then in essence we're saving the $500,000 per year in the rent, right? So that's $1 million we would be saving in rent. Granted, we're going to have to put soft costs no matter whether we build out a suite at Cummings Center or we build out that temporary space. That's going to be cut either way. That's a net zero.
Yeah.
We also pay to rent that space, that we leased that lot for $43,000 a year. It was very inexpensive, but nevertheless, we paid $43,000. We no longer have to pay that rent. So that was sort of a win-win. Is okay, we're going to renovate City Hall.
When you talk about that lot, that's the lot at the corner of Chapman and...
Correct. The small lot and then the bigger one.
Chapman and Federal Street.
Federal Street, correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
So and there's the small one next to the McLean building, as well as across the street there's the big one behind there.
Yeah.
So that's right there is what we as a city have always paid rent on it forever, however long.
Yeah.
So therefore, we approved the $8 million in order to do that, at least to buy the property.
Yeah.
And then, the 7.25 was to purchase the property, but that additional 750 is used to whatever the soft costs were to relocate it within the building. And that's still, we don't know exactly where that's at. And that's something for discussion that still needs to go further. The building itself, the City Hall, like I said, they're looking at a $25 million price tag to renovate it and build out the back part of it where the police station is. That, again, has not been appropriated, the funding for that.
Yeah.
Now, again, we as a city, the administration right now has presented the scenario is we always want to maintain, or retain rather, the surface level of the parking behind the dollar store. That's something that's a must. I own a business downtown. I know that if my parking lot's full and as well as out front, cars are going to leave. They're not going to make the opportunity to try to pull in their refined spaces. The parking lot is very, very instrumental in keeping it thriving downtown. When the Cabot has their shows, everyone's busy.
Oh yeah.
We're all beneficial of that. The residents are beneficial of that during snow emergencies. So it really was a vital part of that whole thing.
Yeah.
Now,
well, that's a fundamental problem that the city really needs to, I think, bite the bullet one of these days and build a parking garage. That we're going from hand to mouth with these things, trying to find spaces here, there, and everywhere. And part of the theory of keep jacking up the rates on the parking, trying to discourage people from staying too long, it's counterproductive. So I think sooner or later, you're right, there's something dramatic has got to be done about parking downtown, or we give up the idea of a vibrant downtown community. If you can't park there, you're not going to walk from Goat Hill or Ryle Side to go to the Cabot, at least not in the wintertime.
Right. It's, listen, in the suburbs, we want to be as close as we have to be to the venue. We're in Boston. We don't mind walking that quarter of a mile, parking in North Station and walking forward. So it's interesting how we look locally here, and we want to be close as possible. Parking garage, I believe I was told back in the 80s, they looked at even creating a parking garage behind the old Beverly Co-op, or what's now North Shore Bank, and that part, the Pond Street lot, because of the way it dipped down and everything.
Yeah.
So I know that was considered at one time. So I don't disagree with looking at it, but again, it's how much money do we want to spend on that?
Yeah, that's what's the grand scheme.
Right.
Got to figure all these pieces got to work together, and I don't think that, at least it's not presented as this is the big picture, and we're working on this little corner here, and then we're going to work on that one. It's just all of a sudden, we're going to renovate the City Hall. And it comes as somewhat of a surprise.
So the City Hall was always part of the capital expenditure plan, right? So we knew that's always out. So that's out in the public. If you go on the city's website and you go under the finance directors, if you go on the website, you'll see actually a spot where you can go look at the city budget. And then as well as that city budget, it shows you the capital expenditure plan.
I tried that city budget, for 47 pages of it. It cures my insomnia.
But it does. But it shows you what the long-range plans on doing certain projects. So City Hall, the DPS, their yard and stuff like that. So it shows you what potentially, and it shows you where the funding could come from, whether it's free cash. It is spelled out there. It's finding it, though, is the biggest thing. And I think that is, as a councilor, I should do better to try to make sure people are aware that it is there for them to read.
So what we're coming to the conclusion of, we need to have another discussion because we've run out of our time already. And would like to invite you to come back again and continue with the discussion, what's really going on in City Hall and around town. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this evening. And stay tuned, we will be back. And as you'll notice at the end of the credits is my email address. If you've got some questions you want answered, or you want to have a voice at the table, send me an email, we can make it happen. Thanks for joining us.